project that has to happen, and has to happen in a huge way. How we do that is a question of pragmatics.
Very nice talk. It's because I'm an empiricist that I can't cast off religion with the same missionary zeal as many of the people here. And I'll point out that many people are functionally empiricists in many ways. They will not pray their way across the country. They'll take an airplane that has had engineers. When they're suffering pain, they may pray, but they'll pray with Vicodin, making use of the findings that we've gleaned from medical science. They generally will not choose to drink a bottle of bleach because they'll have heard that science shows and empirical evidence shows this will be bad for them unless with suicidal intent, and even that will be capitalizing on evidence that they have gained from science. Right. So in cases where evidence clearly shows things that are in their adaptive best interest, people rely on empirical evidence. And the question is whether religion isn't also used because of its adaptive benefits. There is empirical evidence that people who are religious, adjusting for those factors we can think of to adjust for, have better health outcomes, and there are some obvious reasons why this might be the case. There's social support, and even social activity has strong health benefits. There's practical support in times of need. And also,
those are confounds, by the way, that you're now listing. I mean, social support.
No. They're mediating factors.
Right. Well, mediating factors are confounds. And
No. A confounder by definition is the factor that is associated with the outcome in the unexposed population and is not in the causal pathway. So it is not a confounder, it's a potential mediating factor. And also it can provide great comfort in times of excruciating loss if somebody loses a child. And I'll argue that a small child carries a stuffed animal around with them for comfort. Part of their brain knows it's just a stuffed animal, but it provides comfort nonetheless. And perhaps some people even hold religion with the same kind of part of their brain providing for the comfort. The other issue is that stress has been shown to have great health consequences. People with major stressors in their life have higher hospitalizations and mortality. And there's a large body of literature showing that when people feel that they have a sense of control over their stress, the stress has less bad health benefits.
I have the spirit of your... Do you want me to respond? Because
and then I'll just add one other element, which is I am against incitement to violence in all of its forms and agree that religion should not be a privileged bastion. If there are political elements within a religion, those should be treated as political. If there is incitement to violence, those should be treated as incitement. But religion doesn't inherently entail incitement to violence, and lack of religion doesn't inherently preclude it. And I'm a little concerned about the conflating of religion with some of its bad elements here.
All right, so I want that statement, that last statement, to echo in your mind. Religion doesn't intrinsically entail an incitement to violence. This is a problem with using the term religion as though Jainism and Salafi Islam were the same orientation. There are certain religious teachings that absolutely do incite violence. The doctrines of martyrdom and jihad within Islam, and it's not just Al-Qaeda-style Islam. These are not ideas that are just rattling around the heads of the 15,000 people who went to training camps. I mean, that we're talking about a significant subset of the Muslim world who think martyrdom and jihad are real principles of salvation, that you get into heaven by dying in the right circumstances, and the right circumstances entail killing infidels when there's a collision between Islam and the rest of humanity. But your argument is that religion is useful. That religion helps people, it relieves stress, it consoles people. Yeah. Okay. The utility, yes, but the utility argument, though, is separate from the truth argument. I mean, to say that religion is useful is not at all to say that it is true. Okay, and so we as scientists, we're in the truth business. We're not in the useful delusion business. I mean, I could invent a religion right now that I guarantee you would be more useful than any religion on offer. And if we could spread it to billions, we would live in a better world, and this religion would be transparently false to everyone in this room. It would be a lie. I mean, here's the religion. You know, help people to the best of your ability. Don't lie, cheat, or steal. And here's where it gets novel. Raise your children to value science and mathematics and excel in these areas as best as they can. And if you don't do this, you will be tortured after death by a 17-headed demon named Phyllis. Okay. Now, if we could spread this all over the world, if we could replace Islam with this faith, we would live in a better world. Absolutely. Okay? Does that lend the slightest credence to the idea that this demon named Phyllis exists? No. So we have to talk like this as scientists. Now, you seem to be arguing that there are other ways to be consoled. And again, a thoroughgoing approach to human happiness and even human contemplative experience. I mean, I'm alone among many atheists, I think, in really being interested in mystical experience and in seeking out those experiences. And I've helped organize a retreat for scientists, the third of which is happening next month, where we're going to have 100 scientists sitting in silence for a week, practicing meditation, and then talking for 2 days about the relevance of that to discussions in the cognitive sciences. All of that can be done rationally without presupposing anything on insufficient evidence.
I guess I would comment that many people here have said that high values in our society are, for example, sanctity of life and minimization of suffering. And if we hold those values and believe in using evidence to maximize the fruition of those values, then what you're saying is, supposing the evidence in religion has a causal foundation, let's teach our children. I don't think there's any problem with teaching people to have beliefs based on evidence and hold those to one side, but let's teach our children to have this set of beliefs even knowing that they'll die sooner as a result.
Well, there are problems in getting really clear about what constitutes compassion and the relief of human suffering and wise practice. I mean, nothing is more disorienting to me than Danny Kahneman's lecture about colonoscopies. I mean, I don't know if you guys have heard this, but it turns out that if you give someone a colonoscopy and end it as soon as possible, they actually reliably report more suffering and are less likely to ever get a colonoscopy again than if you end it slowly in a leisurely way. Just keep the tube in and prolong their discomfort, but you taper their discomfort off for many more minutes. So the compassionate thing to do in that moment is actually prolong somebody's suffering. It's an interesting fact about human psychology, which has apparently been demonstrated. We can talk in a very open-ended way about what we want done to ourselves, what we want done to our kids, what is sane to do. And again, there'll be a range of practices, and in that range, you are not going to find much of what goes on in the name of religion. That's my claim.
So Ronnie D'Souza was waiting.
Yes, thank you. I think insofar as we're interested in truth, we could try, beginning with what all religions are absolutely right about. Namely, that every other religion is just a lot of complete rubbishy superstition.
Yeah.
And what I really wanted to say was that while I agree with everything you've said, I think that you were insufficiently
heretical.
You were too receptive to the idea that adaptivity or adaptiveness should be something that might be substituted for happiness. Because I think it's important to remember that the way that natural selection works, there's absolutely no reason to think that what's adaptive is good for any of us in particular.
Absolutely.
And as a matter of fact, even if you believe in group selection, there's no reason to think that natural selection is good even for groups or even for species. After all, most species are extinct, right?
Yeah,
so natural selection couldn't have been all that good for all of them. So I think that it's a really bad idea to think that you're being scientific by suggesting that adaptiveness is somehow something that should be a source of value.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, which I elided. If you want to read a great book on that subject, Lee Silver, I think he's still here, he wrote a book, Challenging Nature, and it hammers away on just that point, that we have romanticized the natural world in that way.
Robert?
Robert Winter, there's a very clear transition between talking and shooting. That's, of course, called economic sanctions, which Bush and the neocons have used very skillfully to ratchet up the pressure and then totally, in their own minds, rationalize the attack that inevitably comes. So I don't think it's just a binary kind of choice there.
Although that could be argued to be a version of shooting. I mean, when people are going to starve and not get medical care, and if you unpack sanctions, effective sanctions, people are suffering mightily. So.
Right. Second point, it seems to me that the prefix "a" has been used in all kinds of contexts. I, by the way, prefer to people like yourself and many of us here as reasonists, and the rest of the world as a-reasonists.
Right.
Because it's always, the prefix A is always supplied by those who have the power, who have the investment in the current paradigm, to describe those who don't have it. And it makes you look. So when Arnold Schoenberg started writing music in the early 20th century, that no longer really adhered to the tonal structure, which was very much allied with the power structure of Western Europe. He never made up a term for what kind of music he was writing. In fact, he described his whole odyssey there for that whole decade as being afloat in a sea of boiling oil. It was so painful and far out and so forth. And so they dubbed him, of course, an atonalist. And even when he came up with a system for composing with 12 tones, they called him the rest of his life an atonal, therefore amoral, therefore, he's a Jew. So he's highly undesirable. And I had his son in my class last week. I was telling some of the folks at dinner last night. And I mean, this thing bothered him more than almost anything in his existence, was they had this sort of label put on him that he could never shake. Finally, my question is, I've heard a number of articulate people like you. Your talk was fantastic. Why don't I see you on the Jim Lehrer NewsHour at least 5% of the time compared to the 95% of the time I see the Christian right being represented in every bloody discussion about almost anything? I never understand why that is, because I don't think they could withstand. I mean, you do see debates occasionally. Cable makes it a little more frequent now, but you're grossly outnumbered in these things, and it distresses me enormously.
Yeah. Well, again, it speaks to this taboo, I think. I mean, the one thing the new atheists can't really complain about so much is a lack of publicity. We have gotten our books sold, and we've gotten interviews. I haven't been on Lehrer, but I've been out there, and but it is utterly swamped, as you point out, by the rest of public piety. And I think unfortunately, and this is something I argued at this atheist convention, that there's something about just calling it atheism that successfully marginalizes it, and so people can dismiss our arguments in our books without even reading them. It is, in an egregious way, that happened at this meeting. David Sloan Wilson attacked me for my bad science. I asked him what science he was talking about. There's not very much science in my books, actually. I mean, certainly my argument against faith doesn't rely on any construal of evolutionary theory, or you're parsing these fights about group selection. And then he came up to me afterwards and admitted he's never read a thing I've written. He just read Dan Dennett and Richard Dawkins and thought that I was of a piece with them. Now, I'm not obviously endorsing his attack on Dan or Richard, but I'm just saying that this is not ad hominem against David Sloan Wilson. It was big of him to admit this, although I would like him to be mic'd when he admits this thing. So I've just mic'd him, but he has been misled by the concept of atheism. He thinks that somehow, you know that someone's an atheist, you basically know everything about their argument against religion.
Okay. We could take maybe one or two more questions. Scott, maybe you'd like to.
Sam, your program about using science to advance a moral philosophy of happiness and well-being is a good one. And the way you propose to do it is a very good one. What is not clear to me is if you think that the proposition that people are better off if they're happy and they suffer less is itself a scientific proposition. Because there have been, and there are today, many people who believe that cruelty, extreme and temporary cruelty, to improve happiness and welfare for the rest of humankind is necessary. Some people who followed Nietzsche and Nechayev believe that to be the case. They believe that science can and will help them advance this particular moral philosophy. My question is, do you really think that science itself will show one particular moral philosophy to be superior to another, or whether this is an open question and we'll just take whatever comes around? And just one final point. The present Communist Congress in China invited some of us at with partial sponsorship from the Commission on Atheism, which is a government commission, to help prepare China for a